Well, good morning. It's really strange. I'm seeing some red jerseys here and some blue jerseys. There's something on today. One little Falcons fan in our last service, filled with faith. That's all I'm saying. I'll leave it right there. It's so amazing with the privilege of watching growth happen in a community, of being here now almost 9 years, is really, really beautiful. John, who is playing bass guitar for you guys in our worship service, his wife also participates on our team. She helps us in our finances, payroll, and all kinds of pieces. And it was so fun. A week ago, he came here. I'm not sure why he wasn't in school. That's a separate topic for another day. But I was 12 minutes late walking into the office, and he greeted me. He's 11 years old, and he said, "My mother's waiting for you. You have checks to sign." He used to be little. Now he's bossing me around at 11 years old. We're coming up to a year when a year ago we put together our mission and vision statement, did some work on that, and we want to review that with you today and love you to be a part of seeing how we're doing. Maybe a little bit of a checkpoint. I'll jump the slide. There we are. A checkpoint to say, where are we at a year later when we look at our mission statement? I'm going to read it to you. To grow as a community of Jesus followers, honest in our message, startling in our generosity, authentic in our invitation to journey together. And part of our series, as David has designed us walking through this series, we want to bring the vision and the mission together and just chat briefly at the beginning of each message, talk about how we're doing, a bit of a checkup, a bit of a reminder for all of us. And when we speak about the idea of growing, I don't know about you, but you can't grow in any area unless you are willing to change or do something a little bit different. In fact, it's impossible to grow without making some adjustments, whether it's something you are doing different this year, different than last year, or even weekly that you make changes to your schedule. Last weekend, for us as a community, it was really an amazing Sunday because we wrapped up a very difficult topic, fear, anxiety, and depression. And of course, talking through that in a very authentic way was awesome. And then we invited you. We did something different. We decided to risk and grow. And we said, if you're here and this is part of your journey or a friend's journey, we invited you to stand. And probably over 75% of every service stood. And we prayed corporately for you, something different that we don't always do. And then we took one more step forward and we said, if you're here, we want to reach out to you. And we had rows of leadership at the front for you to come and to share your story and have a more intimate time of prayer. And as you stepped out and to do something different, you joined us in doing something different as well. And that's what it takes as we move forward in the idea and the plans of growth in our community. It's amazing. I had the privilege of chatting with someone this morning who's walking through the passing of Dad. Dad's on in his age, and it's been about a 9-day journey, and probably in the next few days, his father will be gone from us and from their family. And I hugged him this morning. I said, "How you doing?" And he said, "You know, Bobby, it's amazing. I really am on the far edge. I'm a bit of a worrier. And I'm a person that always goes to fear and anxiety right away." And he just loved the teaching that we did in the last few weeks. And as we were chatting, I said, "Is there anything we can do for you?" He said, "You know what? Honestly, no." He said, "I prayed a week ago and I said, God, I will make you a trade. I want to give you my fear and anxiety, and I want to trade you for peace and strength." He said, "I got to tell you, it's been the most amazing time as I've sat while Dad is at his lowest point, and I've prayed, and I've patted him on the head, and I've laid beside him." And he said, "We're just having the most beautiful time of closure while Dad moves on." So beautiful when we realize about growing. And that's what it looks like when we grow together in our faith, in our community. We reach to God, we pray, and He answers and walks with us. Dave Peterson, our chair of the board, right around Christmas time, he decided to throw us a little Christmas gift and said, "You know what would be great? I love how we're leading with our property, but it would be amazing if we just got everybody to pray more about it." So we did a video. A couple of us were on video, and we asked corporately for you guys to participate in praying. Many of you have been doing that. And I thought, perfect, he's going to be happy now. Then he called me last week. He said, "You know what would be great if the leaders got together of all the teams and the staff got together and the board got together and we prayed together. Again, something different. And last Tuesday we met in the bistro. And about 30 of us gathered together and prayed and listened and had some teaching on prayer. And it was an amazing time of doing something different as we grow and move forward. And listen, on that note, mark your calendars, February 28th, Tuesday, February 28th, we are going to invite everybody to join us for a Tuesday night worship, teaching, prayer night. Well, we ask God, what are we doing? What do you feel you want us to do with this 16 and a half acres at the edge of the city, a significant part of our future? And we've got a lot of great plans, but we want God to participate with us and help us lead us to do the very best we can do. February 28th, we'd love you to be a part of that. Now, that's corporately, that's leaders and staff and board. But what about personally? What does it look like when we grow? I have to show you this amazing picture because I realize when you live in the West, it's important to learn how to ski. If you ski, could you just raise your hand? You're a skier here. Wow, you are gifted, amazing people. I felt it was time for me to grow. It's time for me to grow up and get some skis and get in with winter life. So I joined last week the West Side ski team. Possibly the stupidest thing I have ever done in my life. All of you know Eddie the Eagle, quite famous around here. I want to introduce you to Bobby the Budgie. I can't throw any of these wonderful men out of the bus, but if you look close at their faces, one of them took me to the top of Lake Louise and said, "God be with you." They call it a green run. I don't know if you know this, but there's green, blue, and black. Or there's purple. That's what you get when you bruise yourself rolling all the way down the hill. I've got a lot of room to grow in that area. But growth, to do this, I had to study about skiing. I had to learn about skiing. I had to practice different exercises. None of it helped, but I did all of those things while I was growing to become a skier. And I must confess to you, as a leader, I have actually never felt such a wonderful sense of care and support while I was tumbling down and terrified of what would happen in my life with these wonderful West Side men. Now, in fairness, what they're saying behind my back this last week, I have no idea. That's between them and God. But I guarantee there's a lot of great stories going around as they watched me. To grow as a Jesus follower, you have to be willing to move, to step forward, to risk, to learn, to ask questions, to serve. But no matter what, it takes movement. It takes motion moving forward. For you today, you may need to move into a grow seminar and step out midweek and be a part of that. You may need to look at a Lent retreat and say, that's something I've never done, but I want to do that. Maybe it's a house builder. Sign up to be a regular participant in generosity as part of our mission here. Maybe it's time for you to prioritize your week, starting with Sunday rather than ending with Sunday. That this becomes your kickoff to what you're doing with the rest of your days each week. But either way, to grow, we have to move forward as followers with Jesus. You will know you're moving forward towards growing where you're at a place where you are praying more, you are leaning more on other people for coaching and prayer support. You are growing when you have time for others and you have time for the weaker or time for the vulnerable. There's old words of a beautiful song called Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. And it says this, what a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. Oh, how bright the path grows from day to day, leaning on the everlasting arms. What have I to dread? What have I to fear as I lean on the everlasting arms of Jesus? This week, often I get the privilege, and it's part of my job, and I just love it. I love meeting with people, love hearing storylines. And many times, part of my job is to be an encouragement, to encourage you to walk forward or to participate in a different way in community. And this week, I met a new wonderful man. I'd love to tell his name, but I can't even pronounce it. I've practiced all week long. It's a Nigerian name, and I'm not very good at some of the pronunciations. So we're going to go with G. That's what I'm calling him. It's just G. Sounds like something from a James Bond, but that's what we're going with. And what an amazing time as we gathered together, because he shared with me his story, which I hear lots of stories, and there's challenging moments in all of our lives. And he said, I had a career all lined up, and I did this and I did that, and suddenly everything changed in the last year. And he said, I didn't understand it. I really was understanding what God was up to, and then suddenly my wife was tragically ill, and I realized that this adjustment in my employment was really God sent so I could be there to support her with her cancer and the surgery and the things that she was needing. And he said, I got to be honest, Pastor, the minute we were challenged, we went to our knees to seek God and ask, what do we do in the middle of this? And then he shared with me the ending and how beautiful, how his wife is really in a great place today and how his job is now adjusted and changed. But it was incredible to hear the story of growth, that he's moved forward even now as a long-term Christ follower. He still moved forward in a new area of growing in his faith and journey just as a result of the pieces that has happened to him. If you're going to grow, you're going to have to lean. You're going to have to lean on God and other pieces in the church, and that's what I love about it. Living in a world that has so much unrest, where faith and truth is confused, a world where the moral compass has been lost, and where generosity is often attached to feel-good pictures instead of commitment, I love the church. And I love that we are on mission standing strong, and that we say, come join us, but grow with us. The start of our mission statement. The church, a place where we will help you become a better follower of Jesus. We will give you a greater level of knowledge of God's word. A place where you can find rest for your soul and strength for your mind. A place where others will walk with you. A place where you will find friends to learn with together. Friends to ski with, have coffee with, sing with. A place where you can invest your resource and see them multiplied not only here, but for eternity and eternal value moving forward. I don't know about you, but I've got to be honest with you. It would take an awfully big event for me to want to skip a week of growing here and growing with each other. Westside, I want to report to you today that we are on mission. We are growing as a community of Jesus followers, corporately in leadership, and as individual attenders in the message of faith. Now, as David comes to teach this morning, I want you to turn to somebody and say, I love growing with you because it's a lot of fun. You ready? Do that quick. I love growing with you because it's a lot of fun.
Thanks, man. Well, good morning.
14 guys.
Our ushers are going to come and just help you by receiving your offerings just now as they do that. Our ushers, have you noticed, they're kind of like ninjas. They just appear from amongst us and want to take your money off you. It's great. It's great to just receive your generosity and care for us as a community, and we do say thank you for that. As you've picked up from Bobby, we're thinking very visionally this month. What does it mean for us to be Westside King's Church? This is a kind of wrestling match for everyone in a church, but sometimes we just get so used to living and church being part of our cycle that it's important to take some time occasionally and stop and ask those questions like, what does it mean to be this community? What does it mean to be what we know as Westside Kings? So we want to do this month by looking at the biblical prophets, thinking about their vision, their mission, but actually not just simply the fact that they had vision and mission, but how they worked that out. You see, the fascinating thing about the prophets in the Bible is not just what they said. It's not just that God called them, but how they went about doing that. It was their behavior as they went about doing what God had asked of them that sometimes we find fascinating. So for us as a question about being church, it's not just about what we do and say, it's about how we are, about how we be. So over the course of this series, we're going to talk a little bit about Jeremiah, a little bit about Isaiah. You're going to hear something about John the Baptist. I'm going to begin this morning talking about Elijah. Now, I know some of you are saying, wait a minute, didn't he begin the last series talking about Elijah? So just for the record, I do know about other prophets. I just like Elijah, okay? So, and I think he teaches us something in the process of what we're wrestling with in this series. I think it's important for us to say some things about the prophet in the Bible to begin with. Many people kind of mistakenly read the biblical prophet as a little bit of a fortune teller, a kind of future predictor. They come along and they say, hey, this time next week on Saturday at 5:30, this is going to happen. Or, you know, I'm feeling a sense of strong love in the veins in your left hand. Therefore, that's what fortune tellers do, so I'm told. Well, that's awkward, isn't it? We imagine biblical prophets kind of like the weird tent at the fair where the lady with the black wig and the strange nails predicts our fortune by reading our hands. We kind of know that that's not what a prophet is, but when we talk about them, it kind of sounds like they're horoscope readers and predictors of what's going to happen in a week's time from now. But if you look carefully at Scripture, what you see is the biblical prophet doesn't work like that. What the biblical prophet does is tell the truth. The biblical prophet turns up in places and doesn't say, hey, this is what's going to happen a week from now. What they actually more regularly say is, can you remember what God told us? Can you remember what God told us would happen if we lived in this particular way? You see, the prophet doesn't appear when everything's fine. The prophets rarely turn up and go, hey, everything's okay, I'm just here to say, hey, right? Prophets invariably turn up when we've gotten a little lost, a little distracted from what God's called us to be. And the prophets turn up and say, remember what God said. There's something powerful about being a truth teller. There's something powerful about coming on and saying, we know how God works. Because there's this kind of weird thing about truth in the Bible. It's pretty consistent. It kind of stays the same. It doesn't change. When God said one thing one day, you know what? He says the same thing the next day and the same thing the day after. Now, that seems a little strange to us because we're postmodern and truth's a little gray. You know, truth is kind of one thing one day and one thing another day. And truth is something for you and something different for me. We live in a world of alternative facts. A word I've picked up in the recent discourse has been truthiness. Now, there's a word that should kind of terrify you somewhere, truthiness. You know, it's kind of truth, but not quite, you know. That's unnerving, right? Like, how does that actually work? And here's us, a community of Jesus followers, living in a community and in a context, trying to figure out how do we go about telling the truth. How do we go about living out this mission that says we want to be a people who are honest in our message? The word honest in our message or authentic in our invitation, those are other words for truth, right? They're maybe more comfortable words. You know, if you think about their negatives, you know, hey, you know, I've got this friend, he's a little inauthentic. You know, that sounds like a kind of, you know, okay, that's a little criticism. But if you go, hey, I've got this friend, he's a liar, it's a little more uncomfortable. Socially, we've started to use words to kind of get us away from the language of truth and lies, which has made it hard for us sometimes to be Christians when we realize that one of the basic ethical positions of Christians is we don't lie. Sometimes it's the most important thing we can learn. We live in a world where truth is constantly battled over, and the one thing we see in Jesus that we as God's people should also model is he always speaks the truth. So I want to turn to the prophet Elijah this morning and just engage with a bit of his story that hopefully helps us unpack this and sets us up for the series. In 1 Kings chapter 18, we find Elijah on his way to meet Ahab, the king of Israel at the time, who is not a popular person in the mind of God. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. The famine was severe in Samaria. Ahab summoned Obadiah, who was in charge of the palace. And a little side note from the writer here. Now, Obadiah revered the Lord greatly, but when Jezebel was killing off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them, 50 to a cave, and provided them with bread and water. As Obadiah was on his way, Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, fell on his face, and said, "Is it you, my lord Elijah?" He answered him, "It is I. Go and tell your Lord that Elijah is here." And he said, "How have I sinned that you would hand your servant over to Ahab to kill me? As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom to which my Lord has not sent to seek you. And when they would say he's not here, he would require an oath of the kingdom or nation that they had not found you. Has it not been told, my Lord, what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord? How I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets, 50 to a cave, and provided them with bread and water? And yet now you say, go tell your Lord that Elijah is here? He will surely kill me." And Elijah said, "As the Lord of hosts lives before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today." So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?" What a great intro. Like, I think that's much better than that. Is that you, Dave? You know, is it you, you troubler of Israel? Elijah's response is even better. He answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now therefore have all Israel assemble for me at Mount Carmel with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent out to all the Israelites and assembled the prophets at Mount Carmel. Elijah then came near to all the people and said, how long will you go limping with two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. The people did not answer him a word. And then Elijah said to the people, I, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets number 450. Do you ever kind of read about Elijah and think, like if somebody had bought him a copy of How to Make Friends and Influence People, like this guy knew how to open a conversation with an insult, right? You know, he goes to meet the king. They have this little spat. He comes out in front of all the people. And then, you know, all of Israel turn up. And instead of the kind of classic pastoral line, it's so great to see all of you, Elijah goes with, like, seriously, make a choice. What I want you to see in Elijah's conversation is the economy of truth that he's dealing with. He gets straight to the point. Things are a mess in this country, he's basically saying, and it's a mess because we can't decide what truth we're following. So make a choice. Either choose God, which Elijah, you know from his ministry elsewhere, he knows that's the right choice and the true choice, or choose these other things. But don't think that you can live fluctuating between one truth and one falsehood. Maybe you spotted as we read the story that there's kind of three profiles of prophets appear in this particular text. I don't know if you noticed it, but they're kind of like this. There's a prophet called Obadiah. There's this man Obadiah, and at this point in the story, his presence in the city made it difficult for him to talk with the king. He's there, he knows the king, he works for the king, he loves the Lord. Notice that when the Lord's prophets were threatened, it's Obadiah that takes them out of the city and hides them in a cave and keeps them safe. But Obadiah is so in the city that at certain points, and you see it in the story, he's so in the king's processes that when certain truths are brought to his attention, you notice how he says, well, I can't do that because he'll kill me. Do you realize what will happen if I work this part of the story out in the way that you're asking, Elijah? You see, because you can be loyal to God, you can follow him, but you can end up on the king's payroll. You can end up in the king's employ, and that starts to affect your ability to do what it is that God requires. There's another group of prophets, and they're out in the hill country somewhere in caves. They're hidden, 2 caves, 50 in each, living on bread and water. Sounds like a happy party, doesn't it? And they're there, and they're in this tough place. Now, again, they're loyal to God. They love the Lord. They're committed to his message, but they're in hiding. They're outside the city. Nobody knows where they are. Their message, maybe you figured this out with being a prophet, you kind of have people to talk to. And they're out here in the countryside, and nobody can hear from them. So they're ineffectual in a different way. The prophet in the city is ineffectual because he's bankrolled by the king, and he has huge decisions to make if he's going to speak truth. These guys out in the hills, they're speaking truth, just nobody can hear them, so it doesn't really make any difference whether they speak truth, speak lies, or read nursery rhymes to each other. No one's listening. And then there's the troubler of Israel, this prophet who exemplifies to us that sometimes the core role of being a prophet in the Old Testament is being very annoying. Right? He keeps turning up at Ahab's court, and Ahab hates him, but he can't get rid of him because Elijah won't run away and hide. And this thoroughly irritates Ahab. If you just went away, I could ignore you. But he also doesn't employ Elijah, so he can't tell him to be quiet. So Ahab has this perennial problem that this annoying prophet keeps turning up and saying, yeah, that's not really what we're supposed to be doing. God's told us to do something else. Because Isaiah speaks truth. But it's not just that he speaks truth, but he's positioned himself at the edge of the city in such a way that he can be heard, but he's not being bought. And that's where his ministry starts to unfold for him. Walter Brueggemann, in his book on the prophetic imagination, says that the task of prophetic ministry is to nurture, nourish, and evoke a consciousness and perception alternative to the consciousness and perception of the dominant culture around us. I think Brueggemann wrestles with what Elijah is doing in his own life. That actually what we see Elijah doing is saying, I know this is how the world seems to be working, but I think God's calling us to something different. I think God's asking us to be other than that. You all, he says to the people of Israel, seem quite happy with this. We'll follow this God and also this God. But Elijah's commitment to truth can't let that happen. But it's kind of hard to be committed to truth. I don't know if you've noticed that. Truth is quite easy to ignore. What is the old saying that a lie has traveled halfway around the world before the truth has even got its boots on? We live in a world where lies spread quickly, where lies are constantly moving around, and to be committed to truth is hard. It's hard for us as church because we also feel a core mission within us which calls us to reach the communities that we work in. Here we are, a church quite literally on the edge of the city, and we have to decide, what do we do? Do we run off and hide in the hills, or do we try and reach our city? The difficulty is the balancing act of being a people of truth and trying to be relevant to our communities has proved too much for many of us. In fact, for many churches throughout history, the attempt to lean in and save the world has actually just called us to fall into the world and not be that much different. We became obsessed at points as Christians with being relevant, as if the only thing that mattered was what we were doing and whether or not it was relevant. The difficulty with this is what we found ourselves in is a situation where people who came to church and people who followed Jesus didn't often look a great deal different from anybody else. We were just people that happened to be busy on Sundays. And I think there's a call for us to think very seriously about that. You see, what the Bible calls us to is not relevance, but actually it calls us to be modelers of Jesus. Jesus didn't come and be relevant. He came and was himself. He was amongst people, but he embodied a different kingdom. Jesus didn't come and say, hey, I'm just like you. Jesus came and said, here's a different way to be human. Here's a different way to be alive. So the call for us as Christians is we're not just a group of people who are the same as everybody else, but happen to have some different thoughts about what happens when you die. The call is for us to realize that we are being called to be a different type of people. But how do you be a different type of people? See, there's some research done just recently on children. And it discovered that if you want to raise your children as moral people, then you need to praise them. You need to encourage them. When they do good things, you praise them. And you don't praise bad behavior. Astounding. Who'd have thought it? But the research continued to say that actually what they noticed when they assessed different test groups, they discovered that if you praise your children because of what they did, it is much less effective in shaping their moral character than if you praise who they are. So if your child is cheating, don't say, don't cheat. What they found was far more effective was to say, don't be a cheater. If your child is helping, don't say, that's nice help. Actually say, you're a good helper. And the research discovered that by actually speaking to who they were rather than what they were doing, the impact was much greater. Because the children seemed to feel that it was about them, not just their actions, but their being. And here's another piece of astounding news for you. Children grow up and become adults. And we're exactly the same. Is it about what we do, or is it about who we are? You see, because oftentimes, and we've been victim of this in church sometimes, is we have mission statements, these are the things we do, and you see churches doing really cool stuff. And then you go and meet the people that are doing the really cool stuff and find out they're all jerks. And you realize, well, this is just jerks doing cool stuff. That's not going to change my life. You know, and actually there's a call for us to be the type of people that what we do, which is godlike, comes from us being godlike people, from being people who follow Jesus, rather than just people who do those sorts of things when we feel like it's maybe appropriate. And this is about behavior. You see, behavior is not about what you do, it's about what you be. So there's a call for us to be doers, not beers. Sorry, well, not beers, that was. Not beers. Beer's a different whole subject. We'll talk about it on another day when it's not Super Bowl, right? The question perhaps we have to ask ourselves is, what type of people do we want to be? What type of people does Westside King's Church want to be? What type of individual do you want to be? Do we want to be the type of people who are distant and far from the city? We're far off and we're safe. And you know, Christians have done this. They've created little Christian bubbles. They have Christian houses. They have Christian neighbors. They have Christian schools. They have Christian shops. They have Christian pasta. And everything's safe and everything's okay. And the one thing we can guarantee is you'll never meet someone that's not a Christian. And that's beautiful and everybody loves Jesus. The difficulty is nobody cares. The difficulty is that happens over there and it's disconnected from the world. And I'm not opposed to Christian houses, Christian shops, Christian schools. Christian pasta's weird, but you know, individually these things are not necessarily bad. Hear me correctly. But when we use them as a way to just live in our own little holy huddles, we become like the prophets that Obadiah put in a cave. Nobody can hear what it is that we're doing. But then let's be honest, there's other Christians for whom following Jesus has become so normal to their regular life that actually they're exactly the same as the rest of the world. And at times we've become, and this is perhaps more dangerous to us, where we've started to live in a context where our message about Jesus is, hey, follow Jesus. It's no different than anything else. And that's this sort of side of it. Or are we wanting to be the type of people who are actually different? People whose beliefs shape our behavior. People who say this is what we think about Jesus and that therefore has shaped the type of people that we are, and we are different. This is a question about our values. Not just about our vision, not just about our mission, but about our values. See, values are sometimes described as our core beliefs reflected in our behavior. You see, because what's in you is eventually what comes out. Maybe you've been in a situation where you're trying to pretend to be something you're not. It's tiring, right? It's tiring to constantly pretend you're one thing when you're actually another. And eventually, as you live pretending to be one thing and not the other, eventually you make a mistake and everybody sees the real you. And the Bible seems to call us to a better way of living, which is actually to say, what if the real you was actually what Jesus was trying to call you to be? And then out of that, the deeds that you do, the mission that you live, the way that you unfold your life will make more sense. It's not simply about who we are or what we do. It's about who we are. And we saw this in Elijah. So for me, perhaps we can phrase it like this. Our wrestling match as a community is for a church that is quite literally on the edge of the city of Calgary. We're asking, what does it look like for us to be a truth-telling community? What does it look like for Westside not to be the type of church that hides out on the edge and just we do our nice little Christian things, but also, and perhaps more applicable to us as a community, not to be a church that's not any different from anything else? What does it look like for us to say we're actually trying to process out being people that follow Jesus in his truth, no matter how difficult that is? Part of the difficulty of trying to be a true follower of Jesus is that it is very different. The anthropologist James Clifford talked some time ago about the need for the reinvention of difference. But his critique of Western society was this. What Western society does is it absorbs everything different and tries to normalize it till pretty much everything's the same. And therefore, the one thing and one value is that everything's okay and nobody's different. We might talk about our differences, but ultimately, we're trying to level everything off. Which is perhaps why so much of our political discourse focuses around issues of difference now, because our society is constantly trying to normalize that. You can believe whatever you want as long as it's not offensive to anyone. You can live however you want as long as it's not offensive to anybody. And then those of us who are Christians then find that life very difficult to unfold because Jesus calls us to be truth tellers, to sometimes say there are ways of living that are going to put us at odds with our wider society. Now, this is not a new thing for Christians. When Paul wrote to the church in Philippi, in chapter 3 of this letter, he talks to them and he realizes that what he's calling them to is new and different. And he says this, imitate me. Observe the example that we've given you as Jesus followers. And then he drops in this line, live as a citizen of heaven. Now, we've often interpreted that as Christians to mean, oh, that's great, we're all going to heaven when we die. But this is not what Paul means. Because citizenship isn't about where you're going, it's about who you are now. And for Paul, what was important, that these people, these Christians in the middle of this Roman colony, had to learn that what was more important for them was how they live in following Jesus. Being a Christian called the people of Philippi to a decision. What are you really a citizen of? Are you a citizen of Rome, or are you a citizen of heaven? Tom Wright, in his comments on this passage, says this: the church is at present a colony of heaven with the responsibility, as we say in the Lord's Prayer, for bringing the life and rule of heaven to bear on earth. See, the church is not a group of people trying to get to heaven. We sang it already this morning. The church is a group of people trying to bring God here. Church is a group of people saying that we actually represent God's values. So when you walk into a church, when you meet a gathering in whatever form, whether it's just 3 Christians having a conversation or 150 Christians gathering on a Sunday morning, what we should actually encounter when we walk there is a different culture, is a different world, is a different way of being human. That we gather together and realize, wow, something different is here. Now, it maybe sounds a little dramatic to talk about the church as a colony or the church as a group of different citizens. But it's not that dissimilar to what Jesus said when he prayed for his disciples in John chapter 17. He said to God, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, for they are not of this world, any more than I am of the world. My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, it's an important little piece for us there, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. But notice this: sanctify them by the truth, and your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. You notice how Jesus frames the Christian mission, that we live on the edge of the city. We have a mission place. We have a place that we're called to be Jesus' people, but there's a constant reminder that you must remember you are Jesus' people. One of the most difficult things to do when you're ministering to the city is to forget that your citizenship is in heaven. It's so easy to forget that Jesus has called us to be different. You know, our values, being truth tellers, being Jesus followers, means that you might hear yourself quite regularly say, that might be okay for them, but it's not okay for me. That might be the way that they live, but it's not the way that I live. And those kind of really uncomfortable words are the words that define what it means following Jesus. Sometimes there are times where we just have to say no. Sometimes there are times where we have to say yes when everybody else is saying no. Being a Christian calls us not to decide what's the best thing for us personally, not to decide what's maybe even the best thing for our city. Our call is to decide what's the best thing for the follower of Jesus to do that represents the gospel that Jesus has called us to live out. I think that's what the world needs, is a church being serious about being church. Not just something we do on Sundays, not just something we sometimes do on Sundays, but something that is part of who we are. The easiest way for the church to reach the city is to just move in and be no different. But that's not what the Bible called us to. The Bible called us to be Jesus followers, to be truth tellers, to be those who are here working to build God's kingdom and teach the world what God's kingdom looks like. William Willimon and Stanley Hauerwas said this: what makes a church radical or new is not whether it's conservative or liberal, but rather that the church knows Jesus, whereas the world does not. And for me, that's the question that we're wrestling with about being a church on the edge of the city. How important is it that we know Jesus? How important is that to us as a church, as a community of people that gather regularly? How important is it to us as a group of individuals? How important is it to you that you know Jesus? When you get up in the morning and stare in the mirror as you're preparing for your day, what sort of things do you envisage happening in your day? And does the question kind of form itself in your mind which says, how do I practice truth, honesty, and authenticity today? How do I look like a Jesus follower today? Now, we've tried this over the years in Christian community. It's involved, standing in streets and shouting at people that they're all wrong. It didn't really work. Probably because it wasn't right. We've been condemning, we've been quick to judge, we've been quick to point out, hey, you're wrong and we're right. But actually, when you look at how Jesus processes living out a truth teller, he does it with really controversial language like this. Hey, love your neighbor as yourself. Because if truth is something that we are, rather than just something that we do, our way of wrestling with it will be different. It's not about us just placarding the sense that we know better than everybody else, but it's about us living out what truth looks like. So that people are not so much necessarily even impacted by everything we say, but by how our life matches what we say, by how our lives represent the kingdom and the gospel that we claim to follow. Jesus said it again, as he often does, and said it best, when in John chapter 8, he says, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You see, the prophets in the caves, they weren't free. The prophet in the middle of the king's court wasn't free. The only free prophet was Elijah, and he could speak truth. But of course, that was scary. That was difficult. That wasn't easy. So it's a tough thing we call ourselves to this morning. As a community, I'm asking us to think about what does it look like for us to be truth tellers who follow Jesus. So as I pray for you, I want to ask you this. Whereabouts do you live in your life? Do you live on the edge of the city? Do you live far out in the hills? Do you live in the city? And there's an invitation for you as you think about your life and how your life then combines to join with all of us and become Westside King's Church. There's a question for us is what does it look like for us to begin to practice God's truth in an authentic and honest way? So I pray that God will be your strength in that. I pray that you will find something of his courage and his confidence and his peace as you work out what it is to go and be different. Different in a Jesus-shaped way. Different in a truth-telling way. Different in a truth-living way. Amen. May God's grace be on you.